Hello and welcome back to Climbing Mount Sophia. Today I have a conversation with Matthew Widen. Matthew and I became friends at the Chino conference, this Quest for a Spiritual Home conference, back in May of this year. And I've been very impressed by Matthew, and he's taught me a lot. He has a tremendous commitment to doing the best of anything that he can, and he really demonstrates a commitment to that in a really deep way in his life. It's funny how it doesn't matter whether your expectation is, or it doesn't seem like it matters so much whether your expectation is necessarily virtuous or not. It's just like if you have an expectation, like things are just like you're just setting yourself up to undergo some suffering.
Yeah, that's very Eastern sounding, and I've heard that so much from like more kind of Buddhist minded people just about expectation. It's not something I really thought too much. I guess I probably just have slightly different words or something, but yeah, basically it sounds like a lot of people just try to avoid expectation in general. Like even in
Yeah.
relationships, it's like it's kind of like a said thing is something along the lines of if you have expectations, it's going to be, yeah, it's not going to be a good thing. But I definitely go through life with a lot of expectations. I
Yeah.
just kind of like, I feel like maybe it's just my Western goal oriented way, I guess. I don't know.
Well, I
But
wonder.
yeah.
Well, so let me try this on because I think that's fair, right? Because I think the danger with that is to just sort of make it where everything's passive, right? And you just sort of
Hmm.
like, which is a sort of a Western perversion of Eastern thought, I think.
Hmm.
But I like to think about expectation and sort of clarify it by distinction from intention,
Hmm.
and to think of it in sort of like a spatial way, as like expectation is me sort of like trying to form the future into a
Hmm.
specific format, whereas intention is sort of trying like literally like trying to place a slight tension toward a direction, like try to lean on reality or myself or whatever situation, right?
Hmm.
Like try to kind of lean in a direction, but there's more of an
Hmm.
open-handedness, whereas expectation, when I use expectation, I'm referring more towards a really sort of like this is how this needs to
Hmm.
be. And
I
that's, I
see.
think,
Now you
does
got
that
me.
make a little more sense?
Totally. Yeah, you got me. Yeah. So it sounds kind of like um there's like a dance quality to intention, like between me and reality or between you and reality, where it's like you give and you take, but it's about your own posture as opposed to something tyrannical about expectation, just wanting the other or wanting the feminine or the potential or the future to be
Right.
like under me.
Right, right. Even if it's something like completely virtuous, right?
Hmm.
Like, because this is something, since we've talked a lot about how, like, since Chino, I sort of went through this valley. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of it had to do with a sort of expectation that I had built upon myself.
Hmm.
Um, and what I tried to take all this energy from Chino, all this, and channel it into like, hey, I'm gonna upgrade all these facets of my character basically with this energy. And then it was like as soon as I would fall short, which inevitably I
Hmm.
would in each category, it would be like crushing for me.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so
I know what you
that's
mean.
been, yeah.
I know what you mean. Like, I feel like that's very similar to the kind of hope deferred that I had yesterday. It's like, man, like this is supposed to be day one. Um, but yeah, because anyway, I'd like to ask you how that's going though, because I haven't talked to you about that kind of side of your journey for a while, for months. So do you feel like you're kind of still in that season? Do you feel like it's lifting or is it kind of like waves up and down, in and out of it, or?
Yeah. Well, thanks for asking, first of all. Yeah, I don't know. It's like I in a way, I think it's lifted, but not so much in terms of actual like content. It's more like I've started to learn how to shift. And like actually jujitsu has been super helpful with that
Nice.
because like you know how in jujitsu it's at least the way I'm perceiving it so far, like it's very much about this sort of dance quality, right? This sort of giving and taking of space. It's
Hmm.
like if I give the right space at the right time and take the right space at the right time, I'm going to be successful. But
Mm,
if I'm trying to implement some like plan
mm,
or, or I'm trying to just not give any space, it's like it's going to go
hmm.
really badly for me. And
Yeah.
so I'd say that's one way to talk about it. Another has been I don't know who the quote's from, but it's the quote is the place where the sun always shines is a desert below.
Mm,
And so there's been a shift for me to learning how to sit with and value the rain. I mean, we live here in Oregon, so it's
yeah.
like it's just raining and
Okay.
gray all the time. And it's
Yeah.
like so many people have such an active resistance to this. It's like you can't go anywhere and have just sort of like small talk with anyone without them complaining about how it's raining all the time, right? And
Mm,
taking that in sort of a personal journey space too, and saying, no, like I need if I want to be if I want my life and my character to be a wellspring of life and and like a rich forest, like it needs the rain, and I need to learn how to be with the rain and to value it and to accept the renewal and the introduction of chaos and not have it just sort of like freak out and hold all the pieces of my house together, and
hmm.
more just like sit there with it and be like, oh, okay, there's a leak over here. And, oh, there went the front porch, right? But it's like, okay. And then once the rain subsides, then it's like, okay, well, now I have all that energy that I'm sort of at peace with, that I can work on building things anew, as opposed to like sitting there and be like, damn it, where's the
Yeah.
sun?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, you've described it really well. And it reminds me of something that Matthew Pichot talks about in regards to renewal. And like a time of exile is always a time of renewal. But I think for me, there's such difficulty getting from understanding what you've just said to embodying it. And what I
Yeah.
mean is like seeing the point that you're making right now and then like being able to just live it out purely from my own essence that it just is expressed. Because yeah, I feel like it's usually it's like a conversation between whatever two sides of myself, however you want to define it. It's like a conversation of like, no, dude, chill out. It's okay that things are hard. Like that's actually fine. And then the other side of me is just like totally done with it. Like, no, this is not okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a spirit and flesh thing in Paul's language, or a mind and body thing or something like that. But
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I very much resonate with that, man. Like, like that's that. Like, yeah, I've been in that space a lot. And it's hard to point to exactly one thing that's shifted it a bit for me is actually you've helped me with it a lot. Like you
hmm,
have this thing where you're really, really, I think, sincere and thorough about this sort of posture that you're taking in your life and the sorts of choices that you're making, right? And the turn towards service, right? The turn towards service of your children and this adoption and God ultimately, right? Like all nested
hmm,
together. But um I think, becoming friends with you over this past period of time and, going back and forth with a reasonable amount of regularity,
hmm,
um, has sort of helped me to that and sort of diving into Christology a lot. Like that's sort of where I've been
hmm,
for a while. um, has brought me to this place where the way I find that I can surrender to the rain is like, okay, well, here's a specific example. The other day I was doing the dishes. Like I was standing at, at our kitchen sink doing the dishes. My wife's, 6 months pregnant, a little more than 6 months pregnant, like sort of not feeling very well. Like it's been a bit of a tough pregnancy. And like my
Mm,
daughter's 14 months old and she's all over the place. She's fun, but she's a toddler.
yeah.
And
14 months. Crazy time.
yeah, yeah. Um, and here, like my back was really hurting that day and like all this stuff. And I'm there and I'm like, it sort of landed for me this feeling of like, there's actually nowhere else I want to be right now. Like there's actually
Hmm.
nothing else I want to be doing.
Totally.
And that's the place for me where that sort of like energy of needing to transcend and needing to find the sun again can sort of go to ground out. It's like really
Hmm.
basic service.
Hmm.
And I think that's like for me, that's one of the profound aspects of Christianity.
Yep. Yeah, I think so. I had a similar just what you're describing. I feel like that landed for me from the time of Chino. I might
Mm,
have talked to you about this already, but it was basically like something about going there and seeing and being around so many people who there's a way in which I would just want to say like they get it. Like they see what's going on in a lot of important ways. And then for a few of those people, seeing that they weren't embodying it like in their lives, it was just like for a lot of them, it was like middle-aged guys who are not really, I don't know, it's like just not really living lives that I admire, I guess. As judgmental as that sounds, it's kind of where I think it bases out, where it's like I just see like here's all this potential, here's all this great ideas that you can articulate, and like the world is suffering right now. Like it's an awful place, and we can actually like we can be the way that God or love can land in this cosmos. That's something that we can, and we can all, explain that. But to see, I don't know, I think it was something like to see a differentiation between a few people who I met who I felt like were just killing it at that, like just living it out. Um, and then also some of the talks, like talking about finding a spiritual home. And both Vanderklay and Peugeot's talks were basically like, whatever you think spiritual home is, like if you think it's a certain thing, you're wrong because it's actually God. And yeah, so I think I came home with like this new sense, like I can find God in my particular little narrative, like in going low. That
mhm,
Jung quote, like modern man doesn't find God because he doesn't look low enough. And
mhm,
so it's like all of a sudden it's like in doing the dishes. Right now it's in sitting here and talking to you, like the meaning of that. My dog right here and like being outside, all these things. Like you can so easily find the divine in this. Um, so I kind of came home from Chino like with a renewal of, oh my goodness, like I went over there talking about a spiritual home with all these like strangers and met a few people, made two friends, you and Ted, and saw my best friend Caleb. And then I came home and felt like, oh, like now I can find God here in a way that I couldn't before. Which is
mm,
yeah, which really landed. But I
mhm,
would like to also say, not to go on and on, but you were saying about how this service thing is and Christology and how this is so Christian, kind of Western. Um, I've been talking to a friend about that and like the Eastern path. I'll just, basically what I mean, the Eastern path to God and the Western path to God. Um, and he's someone who is very Eastern. Um, but he was saying what I notice over and over is that the Western person, if you look at what they do, like someone who's really Christian and is Western, if you look at what they do, it's a life of like embodied service. Like they're taking care of the poor or they're in some way, and they usually are failing miserably. And there's like all sorts of corruption, just like there is in all of us. But if you look at what they're doing, it's they're taking care of people. And then this person's opinion was, if you look at not the true Eastern um, guru or something, but if you look at the Western person who's like obsessed with Eastern ideas, usually they're like not really doing much. Usually they're
Mm.
like really good at talking, and they're really good at making things sound great. But in terms of their personal life, like their prayer is one of meditation, and like self reflection. And so this friend was just saying he finds in that kind of meditation like a focus on self that he's trying to get away from. And this is someone who I really really admire. I don't want to
Mm.
say who it is, just for their own like personal, privacy. Um, but yeah, but so they were saying like those people on the Eastern, people who can espouse Eastern ideas, if you look at their life, seems it's not that it's selfish, it's just kind of like empty. And then the Western person is who's doing it well, is committed to service in a way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I just finished a book called Alone with Others. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Um,
No.
it's by Stephen Batchelor. I would highly recommend it. I think it's one of the better books I've read. Certainly one of the better books about Buddhism that I've ever read.
Hmm.
Um, but one of the things he talks about in there is how Buddhism has sort of gone through this cycle in the same way that Christianity has, right? Where it's
Hmm.
sort of like initially the Buddha is very much interested in service. He's very much interested in embodiment. He actually is like consistently rejecting sort of metaphysical speculation and ideas about just, like floating off into oneness, that sort of thing. Like he's
Hmm.
very much about service here now.
Hmm.
And then like over time you get the Mahayana tradition and a sort of a significant movement towards an abstract nirvana as sort of the goal, right?
Hmm.
And then you get a change where it comes back down in with the bodhisattvas, right? Because the bodhisattva is um like the life of the bodhisattva is all about purification by service, right? It's fundamentally
Hmm.
about serving others, and that actually and he makes the point in the book that actually if you're pursuing enlightenment or Buddhahood and you're not doing it for the sake of all beings and not for yourself, then you're not doing it.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting because it's sort of like, I don't know, I've been at different times critical variously of East and West and this denomination and
Hmm.
church and that and all these things. And one of the things that like I have a friend who's been on my YouTube channel a few times, especially early on, who has been like he grew up Mormon, relatively secular for quite some time, and he's just recently started going to an Orthodox church. And we have a like a biweekly meeting with him and a couple of my brothers and some other people that and him and my brother Aaron, who's also been on my channel, we're going back and forth because he's going to this Orthodox church, and my brother Aaron's very suspicious of the institution of the church, and they were going back and forth. And one of the things that he said that really struck me was like, and I've been thinking about it more and more, and am trying to back away from those sorts of broad critiques for this reason. It's like, well, you can't just sort of generalize in either direction because it's like, yeah, of course, there's a lot of people who are corrupt in the church. There's a lot of terrible things that have been done in the name of Christ and Christianity and like all these like and Buddhism and all this other stuff. But it's like there's also like unless we go to every church and take every person, it's like you were saying, right? Like everybody does it relatively poorly. But I
Hmm.
do think that one of the things that you really said that I think really puts the finger on this is, if you're a Western person moving into the East and it's not landing in some sort of service, you should be concerned because I think that
Hmm.
there's a big strain of that, but I don't think it's legitimate. I think it's illegitimate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I think there's like a, well, yeah, I think there's like a real difficulty. Um, I'll use an analogy taken from this friend, which is it's like an operating system. It's like okay, so I'll just use his language. I don't want to say this is my idea because it's a really good idea. Um, he talks about the Western person, the Eastern person, kind of like a Mac and a PC. And if you try to load a Windows program on a Mac, like it won't land and it'll kind of corrupt it. Like there's so much that goes into the upbringing and the thinking, just the entire way of an Eastern person, someone who just grew up in a village in the mountains of Nepal is going to have such a different worldview. Their entire culture, their everything has been formed in a different system, and it's really hard to land like a Western worldview to an Eastern person or the Eastern worldview on a Western person, I think. Um, but so I do think that there's a time to generalize and a time to not generalize. I think when it comes to criticism, you have to be really careful with when you generalize. Like general criticisms are really you got to be really careful. This is a conversation I've had a lot with Caleb about generalization because he has a Protestant practice, like he's in Protestant missions, which like I have, which is where I was for years, and I'll likely return to. And at the moment, my Christian practice is in the Eastern Orthodox Church, like, and so we have to talk about that because we are going through our whole journey of life together, and so we have to talk about that, and we have to talk about those things in generalities at times there because there are differences. Like there is something different about Western spirituality than there is Eastern spirituality. There is something different, and that difference does land in general. It's not that it lands the same way for every single particular person. And in the same way, like for my friend and I, which is much smaller, my practice being Eastern Orthodox and he gets a lot of the ideas, but his practice is just Protestant, like it always has been for him and I. It's like you have to find the times when the generality lands.
Yeah.
And so we end up using like funny language um, to avoid making things too negative. Sometimes I just think it's silly. Like, well, instead of talking about Protestantism, oh, like that's like a Protestant view because I could tie it back to like the doctrines of the five solas or something. Instead, he would prefer I just say something like, no, that's like a modernist view of Christianity. And it's like, and then that doesn't make him necessarily feel like he's, one of the people who I'm so-called criticizing or something.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah.
I think you do have to, like, there is a way that you have to generalize. I tend to be a lot more on the like just quick and dirty generalizations. Like I want to just be able to get this idea and group it over there and then get this idea and group it over here. And I think that there's obviously danger in that, but I think it also is because I don't really care that much. Like I'm not going to be offended. It's like I want to kind of get to the fact here. Um, yeah, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to pick up on something on this analogy that your friend used, right? The Mac and PC program thing, because I think that's a really good way of getting at something important here, which is that there's this, and I think it comes out of modernity. Maybe it's deeper than modernity, I don't know, but it's maybe emphasized in modernity that the religious framework to which you subscribe is something like a program that you run. And I think that is how it is for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
He was talking about operating system. My
right.
dog, I started sorry, 1 second. I started petting my dog. Now she's not gonna leave me alone. She like weighs as much as I do. Ren, sit. Hey, sit. Lie down. Stay. Okay. I'll just
Nice. Nice, nice,
yeah,
nice.
so sorry, I'll ask real quickly. So he means it in terms of operating system, like the
Hmm.
and so Is that what you mean? I guess that's pretty similar to like program. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like an operating system is like where all of the things kind of land um, underneath like the actual ideas. It's like almost like the canvas on which everything lands or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, because maybe I'll sort of just set that to the side a little bit. Maybe we can come back to it later if it applies. But part of why I mentioned like I've been really interested in spending a lot of time with Christology is, let me decide where to start here. Okay, I'll start here. So, have you watched The Chosen?
No.
Okay.
I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Just
No,
haven't
no,
watched it.
that's fine. It's been really helpful for me, especially in terms of Christology, because I think broadly, again, broad generalization here, modern version of Christianity, I think very much overemphasizes um, the God aspect of Jesus and underemphasizes his humanity.
I agree.
And I think The Chosen has been really helpful for me. And it sounds like for a lot of people who I've talked to about it, in re-emphasizing the fact that Jesus was like a person who like
Hmm.
walked around with other people and was just like a human being who would suddenly like wild things would happen around him. And so there's been a progressive sort of like wrestling with Christology. You know, at first it was
Hmm.
very murky when I started, but this fall we watched the third season, and the last episode of the third season is the miracle of the blows and the fishes, and then it ends with Peter walking on the water and the calming of the storm. And I glimpsed something in that episode that I had never seen before. There was something about when Peter gets out of the boat to walk on the water, and he walks on the water, and that that thing happening, I realized that like I have never believed in Jesus.
Hmm.
Like, and I had this whole a couple days later, I was in a fairly deep meditation prayer space, and Jesus showed up, and I was talking with Jesus about this. And one of the things he said to me is like, well, you've been trying to believe your whole life, but like, you know, and you have to the degree that you've been able to manage, but like, have you fully believed it ever? No. Right,
Hmm.
because like what I think what it was, and I can't really put it into language, right, but what it was this landing of the sense of what it might feel like to truly like existentially place yourself in like, there's this Buddhist idea of taking refuge in the Buddha for the existential questions, right? This this the existential question of like, what does it mean to be a human being? Like, how is it that things are transient and still mean something? How is it that like, what's
Hmm.
the meaning of life? All these sorts of
Hmm.
things that are unanswerable questions. It's like the way to address them is not to try to answer them, but it is actually to take refuge in a particular historical person and place your faith in the fact in a possibility that one can actually make truly meaningful this life.
Hmm.
You know, the Buddhist version of that is taking refuge in the Buddha, and the Christian version of that, I think, is taking refuge in Jesus.
Hmm.
And it's like, for me, there was this like recognition and realization and like a glimpse and a taste of what it would be like to truly make that existential move, to truly like make the most real thing this God man.
Hmm.
And it was like it was like if you were able to actually do that, you would immediately be able to walk on water. Like you would
Hmm.
immediately like all of heaven and earth is open to you.
Yeah.
But it's like all of the stuff, all of the programming, all of the operating system feels like it's in the way of that,
Hmm.
right? It's in because it's this, it's a system of operation rather than this very basic, simple, but like ridiculously deep existential movement of like placing faith into
Heaven and
something.
earth coming together. Okay, this is getting really good. Let me just put my dog inside, and then
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
this is
perfect,
getting
perfect.
she's still like 3 feet away from me, happily watching me. But
Nice, nice.
it's hard to focus with her right here. Okay, this is really good. So, okay, first I want to say before I forget, um, you make me feel like this idea of the Eastern and Western kind of being different operating systems. Only a Western person would say that is kind of what you're making me feel like.
Yes, 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 yes. That's a good way of saying it. Yeah, I'm like trying to point
Um,
underneath it.
uh-huh. Yeah, okay. And then on the incarnation, okay. I and I don't first let me ask, what do you mean by Christology exactly when you say that you've been in this space of exploring Christology?
Yeah, like the notion that Jesus was actually God and man.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So
The
yeah.
incarnation, but also, I mean, also death and resurrection and redemption and all that stuff. Although to me, that's actually like it actually becomes sort of like second order importance to
Hmm.
the incarnation. I think the incarnation is actually the most important thing.
I think so. And so in the church, in Christianity, we have like two beloved doctrines. And so the first is the Trinity, and the second, I shouldn't say first and second. One is the doctrine of the Trinity, and the other is the doctrine of the incarnation. And so the Trinity, we can talk about maybe a different time. There's more there that we could talk about, and we'd have a great time about the one being really real and the many being really real, that God is both
Mhm.
one and many. But
Yep.
the incarnation, see, I think that what the Orthodox practice, um, and I'm thankful that like you and I have the many months and conversations that that like I'm not in even in the fact that I've moved from a charismatic Protestant Christian practice to an Eastern Orthodox practice, I see so much good and God in like any like my love for religion as such is so much greater than like what is not religious, that like everything inside of that is so much higher, but I do have like a I almost have like a hierarchy of like religious practice, I feel like in the back
Right.
of my mind, at least for me personally. And it's something like climbing up towards Christ or Christianity, and more towards like the ways that Christianity was practiced, um like a while ago by everybody, a
Yeah.
1,000 years ago by everybody, and there was a true connection, um but yeah, I love the tradition, but not the nostalgia. But I'll say with the incarnation, like the doctrine of the incarnation, what I think is the practice that was laid out by the church in that first, like, let's just say generally first 1,000 years, was all about this screaming, like, this is true. And so I get that now, like even in my Orthodox practice, even this morning, in the way that I do my morning prayers, like the it's not the words or the content of the things you say, even though what you say is that, in saying the creed and in doing the prayers and whatever. But it's not about that. It's like underneath that, the fact that everything is done in the way it is this screaming meaning is real, which is, I think, like it's something similar to the incarnation. Is meaning is real. It's like,
Mm,
obviously meaning is real is way less good and way less cool and way less like true than Christ is both man and God fully. That's the better way to say it, but at least for like a kind of secular minded person, the idea that meaning is real, like that's why we go to a particular church. It's like it's always this landing of the infinite and the finite. And so we go to this particular church, and then in that church we have these certain rituals. And so and then it all culminates in like the very center is this practice of the Eucharist. And what are we doing? It's like we are eating this bread and drinking this wine, and we can say that it is both. At least as an Orthodox, we would say that's not bread and wine, which is a symbol of the body and blood of Christ. We would say it is, and we also, like the Catholics, we wouldn't say it's no longer bread and wine because it's the physical body and blood of Christ. We would say it is bread and wine, like really it's bread and really it's wine, but it's also the real blood and body of Christ. It's the landing of Christ in reality, and we all participate in it and we all consume it. And it's like it's our way of trying to believe that, trying to believe what you said is like nobody other than Christ himself has actually believed, which is that the infinite and the finite are somehow either can come together or are from the same father or something like that. And yeah, like
Well,
I have to say I've never believed it, but I do see that our practice is one of like every way that we act is to say this is true, let us try our best to believe this. Like
yeah, yeah.
meaning is real, Christ is both man and God.
Yeah. Okay. So a word here about belief, right? Because I think this is one of the things that's really important is like understanding belief as being something it's more like the way you orient toward the world that is not under direct control of your agency,
Mm-hmm.
right? And one of the things I really like about how the Orthodox Church holds the Eucharist and holds the notion of symbol is I think it gets closer to what I'm trying to talk about here, which is something like, because I didn't quite finish this, but it's for me, what has been really tremendously fruitful in this time has been not trying to answer that question of is Jesus fully God or fully man and fully man, right? But instead, calling myself into question, calling myself to account to the deepest level of existence and the world in front of the question, right?
Can you
Not
explain what you
at
mean?
yeah, like I don't know if I can actually, so let's try. um, like, hmm, hmm. So there's this idea, I forget who I heard say it, but or maybe it's in something, maybe it's in the Orthodox way. It's in some like Orthodox thinker or something, but
Mm-hmm.
that you shouldn't approach scripture and God with the question of like how to make it fit the way you understand the world. You should approach the world with the question of how can it be that the world is such that this is true,
Hmm.
right? And so
Can you
what
say
I'm
it again? I want to hear it again.
is that how is the world such that this this is true, right? So what I'm trying to do is take this, right, not answer the question of is Jesus God and man, but instead to take that question and then measure the world against that question. Is like what what am I and what is the world were this question like like it's hard because I think it's really difficult for us to have this idea of like sitting with a question
Mm-hmm.
and then bringing other things in relation to it because when we sit with questions we're usually trying to answer them,
Mm-hmm.
right? But not trying to answer because I like it's like well what the hell would it mean to answer that question? Like
Mm-hmm.
you don't know because in some
Yeah.
sense in order to answer that question you have to fully know what it would mean to be God and fully know what it would mean to
Yeah.
be man, and both of those are questions
Mm-hmm.
you can't answer. And so it's like okay, so then just sit with the question
Mm-hmm.
and then call all of yourself and all of the world to account to that question. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's because there's a way in which like man it's hard to describe but it's like the sort of shifts that I have felt when because there's a few times because I have meditation and prayer practice that I do every morning. Like I very much blend East and West, right? Like
Hmm.
I start with the Jesus prayer, and then like repetition, and then like prayers of repentance until like I feel clear. And then I do Vipassana meditation, and then I do like Neoplatonic contemplation, and then I
Hmm.
transition into like different prayers and the Lord's Prayer and all these other things. And then there's some of the there's some different texts that I work with. Some are Socratic, some are Christian. And at different points in doing that practice, like most of the time I do the practice and I'm all over the place, right? Like I'm sitting for meditation and I'm like 10 minutes in and my back hurts and I'm like falling over this way and this and all that stuff. But right? But
Hmm.
every now and then it hits, right? Every now and then I can really land down into this place. And the reason I do it the way I do is because I find that I'm not really able to pray until I'm properly meditating. And like if I properly meditate and let
Hmm.
go of all the stuff, then I can pray. And it's like if I can get there, there's a few times I've gotten there, and then I do this thing where like there's a meditation practice where you ask the question, who am I? Who am I really? And you take every answer that comes up and you're sort of like you acknowledge it and then you let it go and then you ask the question again. And you just do that over and over and over again, right?
Hmm.
And so it's sort of like doing that, but with a definite like placing the person of Jesus as sort of the ideal, the type, the really real, but
Hmm.
not in a way that I like claim to already know what he is,
Yeah.
but with the question that he presents to us, placing that as the really real thing, and then calling into a question both myself and the world and saying, what must what must it mean to be a human being, and what must the world be like such that this could possibly be true? Something like
Hmm.
that.
Okay. Yeah, that's really deep and really profound. Like this is a really profound um thing that you're taking me into here. Are you okay with me using the word mystery instead of question?
Yeah. That's fine. And I don't know if
Okay.
you've seen that last conversation that John and David and I did, but that plays in a lot here too.
Okay. I did listen to it. I don't remember that bit.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a notion of God as mystery that was a big part of it. But yes,
this was like a month or a month and a half ago that you guys spoke last.
yeah, yeah,
Maybe even 2 months. Okay,
yeah.
yeah. I don't know how I don't remember that.
That's totally fine.
Maybe I
It.
do.
Don't worry about it. I
But
was just throwing that in as context. But yes, I'm totally fine with using mystery
yeah,
here because that's I think
yeah,
yeah, that's
because
right.
yeah, it's like how could you answer how could you answer it? And so like that literally has taken me from a Protestant practice to an Eastern Orthodox practice because it's like I'm sick of trying to answer this.
Right,
I
right. Because
can't.
The Protestant spirit is a rush to answer the question.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a see. I'm gonna take things in a bit of a different direction
Okay.
in in a kind of Protestant direction here. Maybe not Protestant, but maybe it's Western. Maybe it's Catholic. See, when you describe your morning prayers and your time of meditation, I think two things fundamentally. One is how good it is that you can do this, like the mixture of Eastern and Western, that you can have like a Western, I shouldn't say Eastern or Western, but that you can have like Christian prayer, and then you can have things um that are not traditionally Christian, that are not like things practiced by the church together. And on one hand, I feel like that there's a way that the reason I shouldn't say the reason you do that, but I guess the reason that I would do that is something like because I know how edifying it would be to me as a person. So on one side, it's like that helps me get up higher, but there's a fear I have at the same time, which is how could a mixture of practices like that land not just for an individual, but like how could I pass this to my children without them going through the same like journey that I went through in order to get this bit of Buddhism, this bit of Neoplatonism, this bit of Christianity, and to say my prayers in this certain way without having them go through and really, like, in a tyrannical kind of a way, force them to be me, where it's like they have all, instead of like all of, I'll use my son as an example, all of what leads Joseph to his practice, spiritual practice, instead of allowing him to become that, I go, hey, like I could see myself in a perverse way in like 20 years being like, Joseph, I want you to get what it is to be a Whedon. So here's like 40 lectures by John Vervaeke in 2019. And here's like 30 videos from Jonathan Pajot. And you got to listen to this like conversation. And like, here's my friends and yada, yada. And like, hey, like you should really listen to like these talks at this Chino conference. Like I'm making a caricature of it, but
Yeah.
there's a way that there's something there of like wanting my spiritual journey to be the spiritual journey that, like, it's almost like that expectation thing, like controlling things that are outside of what I should be trying to control. So then what's the alternative? um the alternative is like, because I have a spiritual practice which is very traditional, in the sense that like I surrender to, over and over, I surrender to certain things that have just been done for a long time, and I basically just go, okay, like they've been done. And it's not that I believe, it's not that I could articulate, or that I necessarily even think that this is the best possible pathway, like in a kind of brainy kind of a way. It's more like this has been the pathway, and I'm going to continue on this pathway. And I know that if I do that, like there's a, because I'm listening to you describe your morning prayers, I'm thinking, could I do that? And I feel like no, because I would feel alone. I'm not saying that you
Mm.
are alone or that you're being individualistic. Um, and like physically speaking, in either case, I'm just sitting in the little corner of my house. In a way, I'm alone in either case, but there's a way that it's like, I don't know, there's like a, I guess I hope there's like a surrender to the good of tradition, um, in the way that I have just a Christian practice, where it's like I'm so glad that I found Orthodoxy, because I can still call it Christian. I don't have to be like trying to find the answer. And I can have like a mystical Christian practice, but I can call it Christian, and I can raise my kids in it, and they can be around other people who are doing the same thing, and they can find spouses who understand them. Um, yeah, and there's kind of like a, I guess the hope is that in that slowness, I feel like maybe I wouldn't be able to reach as high necessarily, but like I'd be a part of a community, or I'd be a part of, me and my family would be a part of something that's like more connected. But yeah, I don't know how to think about it. I don't feel like I have like a clear way to think about it. I'm kind of just like laying out some thoughts I'm having as you're talking. Um, because yeah, like I guess those are the two things. One, I feel like in a way, I feel like your spiritual practice is like higher than mine almost, or something like that.
Mm.
Don't take that in like the simplistic way, but just like there's like a depth that maybe you can achieve there, that it might be way harder for me to get to without like going through the same path that you went through.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and then on the other hand, I feel like a fear that I would be leaving behind. Like when my kids are 9, they're not going to be able to follow me through Buddhism and Neoplatonism, but they can follow me through like my prayer book. And
Yeah.
do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then we can
Yeah.
go to the church, and they can watch how the practice at home lands in a little bit of a larger community, and they can always they already like relate me as their dad to our priest as like a higher level of father, and so they see reality in like a, hopefully they're seeing reality in like a fractal way. It's like them to me, and I'm this meeting place between um them and God in a way. And then all of us as a family, we see our priest, and he's like a meeting place between us and God. And so
Yeah.
hopefully it helps them to land in like a practice. Do you know what I mean? So how does
Yeah.
that all resonate and sound to you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so first of all, I appreciate the reflection and thoughts. I would like to clarify that like my sort of laying this out is an attempt mostly to sort of invite you into like considering the question and what I'm proposing. And I don't at all want to sort of set up like, oh, my practice is a good way to do
Oh,
it
I
even.
know. I
Like
know.
I don't
I know.
even
I
know if it
know.
is. So
No, you're being a friend. You're being such a
yeah.
friend. Yeah.
But so I definitely hear what you're saying, and I don't have, like I don't have an answer. Hold on. Oh my gosh. Okay. Sorry. They were contacting me from work, and I saw that and I was like, "Oh dear." Um Apparently they thought I was coming into work today, but I'm not actually on the schedule today. So anyway, yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Okay.
All taken
Okay.
care of.
You're saying you don't actually have an answer, which is true.
Yeah,
I'm with
because
you.
well, because yeah, I almost like I hear everything you're saying, and I like the way I want to respond to it is almost like a sort of like respectful acknowledgement and almost just set it aside a little bit
Hmm.
because it's like I feel like there's this way in which we all find ourselves in our lives with
Hmm.
the particular place and circumstances and all those things, and it's like if you're true to those, you're going to find yourself in some situation.
Hmm.
And I think I've found myself in the situations I have been and that I described to you here to the degree that I've been true to where I am. And I
Hmm.
think as well as I know you, I think you're very much the same. Like
Hmm.
you're trying to be very true to the circumstances and to the good and the true
Yeah.
and the beautiful as it shines to you. And so in the question of practice and church and connection to community and all those things, I almost just sort of like want to set that aside because like what I want to talk with you about, what I want to hear you reflect on is this sort of resonance with the question and mystery of Christology. Because I know that you are the sort of person, at least maybe I shouldn't presume that far to say no. I, 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 I feel that you are the sort of person who has the sort of courage, because I think it takes like true courage to do this, like true courage and true humility to actually like hear what I'm even saying.
Hmm.
Because I think
I
there's
feel
very
like
few
that's the
people
reason
that,
I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. And so you're thrilled to talk to me about that. And that's the reason I'm like bringing up the tradition and practice thing because I feel
yeah, yeah,
like
because it grounds it
I
for
feel the
you,
same
right?
way to well, no, because what I'm saying is I feel like the exact same way about that with you, where I'm like, this is like the one person, not the one, but pretty much one of the only people and one of the only times that I can like reflect on maybe choices I've made. Like
Hmm.
for example, going to church,
Yeah, yeah.
that kind of stuff. Am I going to become Orthodox? Things like that I constantly wrestle with where I feel like I'm going to get a really good conversation. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
Where I'm like,
Hmm.
I want to hear
Hmm. Hmm.
why. I want to get to the bottom. And like I kind of said earlier, like I'm not I think there's a way that I generalize even in everything I just said. There's like a generalization of like tradition and then being individual, whatever.
Hmm.
There's a way that I
Hmm.
generalize and I just kind of feel like I'm not offended. Um, because I have no idea what's going on. I have no idea what I'm so aware of my own like not having any idea how to move forward in my life. And it matters
Hmm.
so much how I move forward in life. And I'm just like casting like dice into like the abyss. Like, okay, I think this is, and so yeah. So I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah,
same. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like where it's like
yeah.
it's the same thing where and I'm not saying, hey, I'd like to take the conversation back there.
No, well,
But
can I say something about that really quickly? Because
mhm,
okay, so I hear you there, and that's really helpful. And what I will say about that is like for me, um, the reason I as yet do not go to church, um, is because that there's where I see myself in the past when I would sort of like quickly affirmatively answer, yes, I'm a Christian, right?
Hmm.
And yes, I go to
Hmm.
church every those. Where I see myself there is not engaging this question and only engaging answers.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I know,
You're
or I
afraid that you'll just kind of like default back into that mode.
exactly, and I've sensed it, right? Like I've visited churches, and
Hmm.
there's a local Orthodox church that I've visited, and I think about it a lot. My wife and I talk about it. Like at some point, I think we will go back to church, especially just for our kids, right? Like,
Hmm.
just because I'm very grateful to have had that like
Yeah.
sort of default framing with growing up,
Yeah.
and and I find myself very much a Christian in so many ways, but like
Yeah.
I'm unwilling to surrender the sort of reality that has come into my life as a
Totally.
function of continually calling myself into question in relation to Christ. Because that's really what my whole journey has been. It's like, okay, like, Meister Eckhart has this tremendous idea that um, um, the last stage in the journey is to pray God to rid yourself of God, right? And I think what he means is something like, in order for Christ to be truly born in the ground of the soul, the very concept of God has to be absent,
Hmm. Okay.
right?
Interesting.
And it's like that now that doesn't happen until everything else
Is
is
it is
gone.
that okay? Is this different than like the basic? Because I'm just overlaying that with like the basic. In every like old religion, you don't name God, like you don't name that which is above you. Is it basically that same principle?
It's that, but like taken to the existential level. Because like even if you don't name God, you're still aiming at him, right? You're
Hmm.
still like all your practices, but it's like at some point, if and like I'm not at all claiming this or anything like that, and I don't know if anyone
Yeah.
really reaches this, but like that in some sense, like in Buddhism, it's if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him, right? It's that idea. It's like if you think you
Okay.
know what it is, it needs to die. And it's like my journey has been a continual like, okay, like I'm letting go of this, like I'm done
Yeah.
with
Yeah.
this, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, it's back again, but it's way better this time,
Hmm.
right? And so that's that thing where I'm like, okay, I'm not
I know
I'm
what you mean.
I'm not letting go of that
Hmm. And that's so
because
precious.
yeah, and it's like if
Like
that
that's as
takes
precious as it gets.
exactly if that takes me into a church, so be it. That's fine, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just wanted
Okay.
to like I think I feel like we're hearing each other on this point now.
Hmm. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and so like I am not, I'm not at all opposed to the most Christian thing someone might need to do is not go to church. Like I don't think, like
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't have a
yeah.
strict like rule based yeah, I hear you. There's something like that's as precious as it gets. That kind of that transformation. Like
Right.
precious I think is like the right word. It's like there's like a death and resurrection element to that, to like the very very core of who you are. Obviously you can never like once you start on that path you can't ever leave that path. That's like the most precious thing. um but yeah, I guess it's really helpful. I feel like that's the main thing. I feel like it's really helpful for me to talk to you about practice, and to talk about any of these things, but particularly like in something like going to church, how does it land, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, sorry for like I feel like kind of dragging you into that, but
No, it's
I feel like
okay. I
that's
mean, I
really
think it's
helpful for me.
yeah, no, I'm glad to hear it. And I think I'm not at all like resentful of it or anything like that. I think it's a really good point because I think where these sorts of things can become problematic is when it's either like, hey, these are the steps of practice that you have to do, right? Like the character that
Hmm.
you drew, like watch these 40 John Vervaeke lectures and listen to these,
Yeah.
and it's like, no, that's not it. It's like put your heart and soul into following Christ, following the
Hmm.
good, the true, and the beautiful. Like, and if you do that, it's going to find you, and grace is going to carry you.
Do you think that the ways that a child watches their father not follow the rules, but to do it to serve the spirit of the rules, let's say, do you
Yeah.
think that's what really like passes on to a child? Because I'm thinking about how like I think that's fundamentally what I got from my dad was like he, at least as I got a bit older, 10, 12, he was very Christian and like his care was wrapped completely up in his Christianity, but he wasn't like there's a way that um okay, my priest has a saying, which is you can always bend the rules if it's to serve the spirit of the rule.
Yeah.
And so, and there's a way that I feel like I watched that with my dad, where like it's not like he just like went, I want to be so Christian. Let me like, he didn't care about following the rules, let's say. He didn't care about that. But what I watched in him was like the way that he was different and individually following God and how that was like different than, you know, like a cookie cutter, like nasty kind of cookie cutter way of you have to do this, this, and this. But like the way that he kind of like weaved in and out of, I'm even thinking now, I'm thinking of like how he would go to like different churches in town. Um, and then he would always say things like, at every church, there's like 20 people who are in love with God, or 20% of people who are like in love with God and they're finding God at that place. Um, and there's a way in which he was like breaking the rules to serve the spirit of the rules, or breaking the ways of men to serve the Father, something like that.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, like what passed on to me, which I feel like, yeah, which I feel like your kids seeing in you will pass on to them. And hopefully, if I can live up to that, then that's what gets passed on. Like there's a love of God at the root of it, as opposed to like some kind of like a prideful, trying to control the world, following the rules. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah. It's very similar to like our conversation about intention and expectation earlier.
Yeah, I'm thinking the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, like, I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. We were talking about free will versus determinism. Um, and he was sort of talking about how so much of our life is given to us,
Hmm.
right? I don't really like the word determinism because it tends to, I don't know, it evokes in me some sort of like outside control mechanism or
Yeah.
something. It's like, but I like the notion of being given, right?
Hmm.
You're given a shape to fit into. And I think there's the way that to the degree that we have free will, there's really only one question ever, and it's do you choose humility, which is to feel and fit into the shape provided for you, or do you choose pride where you try to make the shape something other than is available?
Hmm.
And it's like that's the only place that you actually really have free will.
Hmm. I always frame that as gratitude versus pride.
Mm,
I don't know if I can explain why. I think
yeah.
like you've helped me understand gratitude more than anyone, which is like if reality really is good, then when you are grateful, you are seeing reality for what it is. And so like literally being grateful is like your pathway to truth.
Yeah.
If as long as reality, if you as long as you're able to accept as an axiom that reality is good,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know that God is good. If
Yeah.
you can accept that, then gratitude is your pathway. I've always framed it that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I obviously there's such a similarity between the idea of humility and the idea of gratitude. But I mean, I totally hear what you're saying. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, I
100%
would
agree.
almost, yeah, yeah. And I like, thank you for bringing in gratitude there because the way I tend to think of gratitude is like gratitude prepares you for humility.
Oh
Like,
yeah, I feel like
like
they're kind
that
of one
sort
and the
of,
same a little bit.
exactly. Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
all the virtues as you talk about them, as you get higher and higher, they all sort of like look all the same. And then eventually they all just become
yeah.
love.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
No, I hear you. I think there's a way that I frame it as like, I think it's like a I think the way that I'm framing it is something like my position is that it's like, what is your response to what you're given? And
yeah,
so
yeah,
it's like all the stuff that you're given, you can either respond with like everything that I'm given, my life, my situation, my health, whatever, death, all of that I can look at, and I can like, what free will is something like, what is my response to what I'm given? And that can be one of Cain or Abel, of like,
yeah,
fundamentally it's either going to be gratitude, which places me in this, it's like inevitable, it's like one and the same. It's like gratitude is to put myself in a position of humility, and to say like, this is really good. Reality is good. And I want to be a part of it, and I want it to exist. And being as such is justified, something like that. And
yeah,
then on the other side, resentment is something like, no, like, I'm above this. And what I am
yeah,
receiving is not worth me. It's something like that. And
yeah,
so, yeah, so I can see how that's like the same.
yeah,
But I mean, your main point, I totally agree with, like, free will. If this is your main point, it's like something like how you respond to that which is given. And it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't
yeah,
matter if it's like somebody who's been beset with like the worst life circumstances. They can be grateful. Like, you can be grateful in a gulag, and you can be resentful in Silicon Valley. It's not about that. It's not about that outside thing. It's just
yes,
like, all that is something like a matter of the stakes that God and the accuser are playing. It's something
yeah.
like that.
It's
It's,
just
do you know what I mean?
circumstance. Yeah,
Yeah.
like circumstance is just the shadows on the cave,
Hmm.
right? And it's like, and so I want to bring this all full circle then, because to me, this is like, I feel like this is the insight that is landing out of this, like, return to the question of the mystery of Jesus,
Hmm.
is like, okay, if I am continually returning to that mystery, then I'm continually humbling myself in a sort of like, in this sort of this place of like absolute unknowing,
Hmm.
where it's like, I don't know if I believe that Jesus was actually God and man. Like, I really don't.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's a part of me that wants to, and then there's a large part of me that just finds myself incapable of it, and I don't know exactly
Hmm.
why. But it has something to do with the fact that, like, all of this is called into question
Hmm.
by that.
Hmm.
And it's like, but and I like, this is somewhat of a like a loose association. I realize that, but like, there's something about that that like has allowed me to come through this valley in a way that is less interested in worrying about the suffering or the particular circumstances or my particular character flaws and trying to fix it all, like, and much more okay with like seeing a problem, having a sense of a solution, and not trying to fix it unless it's
Hmm.
obviously available for me,
Hmm.
right? And I know, like,
I
again,
can hear what you're saying, but it's not, it doesn't come as naturally to me. I don't know what that is, but something in me feels like I am so much more trying to solve that problem that you're talking about, where I'm just like, there's the problem. Let's like chip away at it until I fall asleep, and then let's wake up and keep chipping away at it. And I see that as a fault in myself. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
But I don't, but I also, I'm afraid of a world. I'm afraid, I think, I mean, maybe it's just like the just simple sinful unbelief, or something like not trusting that God will take care of that and trying to control it. But I don't know, like, there's also, oh man, it's such tension. On the
But
other side, it's just this.
this is also one of your greatest, like this is one of the things I appreciate the most about you, is that
Mhm.
you're like, maybe you're maybe the most like, I'm gonna do the best I can to care for others and do good in the world. but in not like a not in an abstract sense of like, oh, I'm going to help
Hmm.
everyone, but in a like, no, I'm going to care for these particular people at this particular time because that's what's available for me, and I don't care how hard it is, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Like you're the most that way of anyone that I've ever met, I think, and like I so appreciate that about you. So like I,
Hmm.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't, I also want to give you proper credit of saying like I also think this is tremendously exemplary about who you are as a person. And that
Yeah.
and that's
And
where that weird tension is.
yeah, there's a weird tension. And like, and I know that that's, I want to say like beyond it, like I know that that's true in the sense that like not that I could explain that that's true or that that's what I need to do or something, but like it's like playing without my knowledge underneath my awareness is like this force, something like that, this force pushing towards those things where like I can't it like what I argue in my mind about what I should do in my life is so unconsequential compared to like this thing that's just going like what is the most, well, you described it as something like what is the most good that I can do, and like obviously I'm going to do that because what better thing is there to do? And what I mean by doing good is like some kind of I don't know, like some kind of promotion of being itself,
Mm.
not just reduction of suffering, though that's part of it, but it's like promotion of being as such. Yeah, and like I don't, and so I feel like I'm constantly trying to articulate that and like explain why I should be doing that, but it's not something that I control.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, very
um
much.
and so like I couldn't, like I wouldn't be able to see a better pathway and not take it, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
um
Yeah.
but there's a lot riding on what I mean by better. It's like that's kind of where the problem or where the tension is. It's like what is that better? And to me, it's yeah, I don't know. It's very Western. It's something like I can't like the adopting the kids is like the thing because I'm like I can't see a better way that my life could be spent, and there's like a cosmic significance as well as a particular significance to that,
Mm-hmm.
where it's like even if you could tell me that like in 20 years everything goes black and like there's no such thing as spirits, like not only is there no cosmos, like heat death of the universe or something, but also whatever awareness is ends in 20 years, I would do the same thing that I'm doing.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
there's
Right,
something
right.
like, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yes. And that's the thing, right? Like that's okay. I just want to like highlight this because that is a really, really important point, I think, because that's actually how you know that something is the best, I think, or at least
Mm-hmm.
partially, is
Yeah.
because you know that like you can stack up every like version of metaphysics or belief systems or
Mm-hmm.
however the world works, and it's like it doesn't matter which one of these you pick
Yeah.
in an
Yeah.
abstract sense. This is still the best thing I can do.
I think it's, sorry to interrupt you, but I think it's like the most obviously loving thing. It's
Yeah.
something like that. It's like because love is its own reward. Love does not need
Yeah.
to be justified.
Yeah.
And so it's like I think that's it. It's like I see this particular path. So that's what I mean when I say better. It's like at the core of who I am, it's the highest version of like love landing, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like it's also for my own transformation. It's something like this is the best way for me to hopefully believe in the incarnation, like to hopefully believe in it as much as possible, is to
Yeah.
take this pathway, this like closest to love kind of a pathway.
Yeah. 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 And that's where it's like, when you talked about maybe my practice is sort of like particularly affords a higher level of insight or something. It's like I have no idea. I'm not claiming that, but that's your words.
Mhm.
If that's true, it's only true and helpful insofar as it actually translates to that, right?
I don't know.
Like
I feel like that's such a, I have such a hard time with that too. I know what you mean though. I know what you mean. It's some,
like it
are you
has to be
just
both
saying
sides.
it has to be embodied? Is that
Yeah,
what you mean?
exactly. That's
Okay.
what I'm saying. Is like if that's making if and I think this goes back to your earlier point about the Western person embracing Eastern stuff and making it selfish. Is like, well,
Hmm.
if that's just sort of like, you know, purifying me in a way that sort of drifts me off away from reality, then that's
Yeah.
not actually the thing. Because,
It's all contingent on what do you mean by me? It's like,
right,
what do you mean
exactly.
if that's just this particular, like, in a selfish way, this particular individual, this like atomized separation of everything else, and here I am, or is me actually, I see me as like this, all of the cosmos, all of us under the saints, under the mother of God, like joyfully being the womb of the good, something like that. And so it's like, I feel like it comes down to what you mean by me, um
Right.
if that makes sense.
But yeah, well, yeah, but without even spending so much time on that, let's just say that like these higher insights need,
Hmm.
like, they're not legitimate unless the actual like tangible being of the particular life that you're living, I'm living,
Hmm.
all of us are living, is coming closer to love, coming closer
Hmm.
to the manifestation of the good. Like,
Hmm. Well, I
because
don't
there's
think they are higher insights unless they do embody,
right, right, right,
you
right.
know. I
Yeah,
feel
yeah,
like
exactly,
that it's
exactly.
like there's like we think that it's a higher insight, but it's actually some kind of perversion. But like eh, I almost want to say, like, you only know that it is higher once you've seen it be embodied. It's like you can see the spirit of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
Father like secretly in the Son, something like that.
yeah, 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 yeah. I am getting near the end of my time here because I told my wife I would be back about 9:30.
Okay, whatever. Yeah, whatever works for you. I'm loving this. This is like really helpful.
I always enjoy talking to you, man. This has been really fun to actually like do a conversation on Zoom instead of just our phone messages.
Hmm. Yeah, totally.
Although I've really appreciated those as well. Like I don't denigrate those. Those have been tremendously helpful.
Yeah, this is way better though. This is like 100 times better. Yeah, I hear you. Um, yeah, I want to keep talking about this. I don't want this to end. I know that you have to go, but I'd really like to continue talking about this with you, about believing in the incarnation, um, about land, how about spiritual practice, about how that spiritual practice lands. Um, I'm trying to just summarize so I can kind of remember about East and West. I guess a little bit. I guess what I mean is, like, for me and you, um, for me, it's something like why I think I feel like talking to you, I feel like helps me get closer to understanding why I do things I do. I don't know how better to say that. Like, what is that? Trying to like I'm trying to look at that thing that is just like chugging along underneath me. I
Yeah.
definitely want to keep talking to you about free will. I want to talk to you about if we have control of what we believe. And you said
Mm,
belief as like belief is, see, when I think of belief, I always think trust. And then I think like the best form
mm,
of belief is courageous trust.
mm,
It's like there's like a naive childishness that we first get with life, and then there's cynicism, which is an option, and then beyond that is like a courageous trust, which is
mm,
childlike. And I think of that as
mm.
belief, but do we choose that? And I think I would say I think that how we like routinize our spiritual practice, that sounds so bland, but I think that's like the best way that we can choose what we believe, if that makes sense. Like that's like the
Yeah.
best effect that we can have on
Yeah.
that core, gratitude or resentment.
Yeah.
um and that's why I have the spiritual practice that I have. I think is like at least part of it is like a hope that I can shape my belief. So yeah, I'd love to talk to you more about that. Yeah, this has been really good. I don't at all feel like I just feel like the conversation needs to continue though.
I know. I know. Well, it will. It will, man.